From Unity of Houston, Texas, this is the Awakened Life with Reverend Howard Caesar. Unity is a non-denominational spiritual community providing a positive, practical, and progressive approach to Christianity. Let's join the service in progress now with Reverend Howard Caesar.
All of us are here really to learn, to evolve spiritually, to deepen our understanding, and to kind of come to know what it's all about on the spiritual path. And we make some mistakes along the way, and that's all part of it. And a good question to ask ourselves in terms of understanding what it's all about is, for me at least sometimes, is are we an ego or are we in a spirit? Are we an ego or are we a spirit? And the reason that that's a good question is because I think that's the dilemma we all face. We may not put it into those terms, but I hope to try and understand or help you understand how just kind of separating that out a little bit to be able to see what that's all about can often help what it is that's going on inside of us and the strides that we want to make. There is confusion and conflict typically that goes on inside of us as to who and what we are. And if you truly knew who and what you are in the mind of God, what God created you to be, what you are held to be in the truth of you by the divine, you would experience truly tremendous peace. You'd be living from really knowing who and what you are. You'd have tremendous peace, what is spoken of as the peace that passeth understanding. You'd have boundless love, an unconditional love. That's what would be moving through you. Nothing could keep you from loving, nothing. And you would have a joy that the mystics speak of as bliss. That's what you really are. That's what God is, and that's what God holds you to be. You are made in the image and after the likeness of that, and that's the journey we are on towards experiencing our true self and those dimensions of life, and not allowing the externals of life to have us be something else and experience something else. Now that's kind of the ideal, and then where we are, maybe at various places along the path, but that's what we're about. And so God has also given us the gift of free will. And so, you know, we've all read the story of the Garden of Eden, and symbolically what that really means is that we have, with our free will, chosen to eat of the tree of the knowledge of both good and evil, okay? And so it's the tree of duality, and the tree of good and less than good, whatever you want to call that, whatever you want to call evil, but it's that which is less than good. And basically, with our free will, we have had the opportunity to choose what we will eat with our minds, what we will digest with our minds, what we will live from and feed ourselves in our minds, whether it will be the truths of God and that which is aligned with the nature of the divine, or if we will focus our minds on the knowledge and information of that which represents evil, separation, darkness, ignorance, and all these kinds of things, less than good. So God created us as a spirit, okay? A dimension of God, a spiritual being, gave us free will. With that free will, we made a separate self, okay? That's our doing. And we call it the ego meaning ego, edging God out. And we made this separate self from within the thought structures and thought system that we've given freedom to choose, okay? So we're not a robot, we're not a puppet. We get choice, we get to create, we get to be like God. God gave us the same nature that God is in many ways. And we can co-create with God, or we can create totally separate and apart. And so understand that the ego only has existence within a person's own consciousness, only within their thought system, and in varying degrees, you know, depending on where they are in their evolution of consciousness toward separation or toward love and oneness. We are always one with God, no matter, you know, even though we've created a separate self, that's not the truth of us, but we may live from it. We created it, it's a lie. And that's what we have to move away from. But the truth is we're always one with God, and that is the truth. Our consciousness doesn't always know that, doesn't always live from that. Our consciousness, our thought system, is divided in varying degrees, dividing up between listening to the voice of separation, the voice of ego, the voice of the separate self, or the voice of spirit and oneness. Now there are two extremes. We live from ego. When we live from ego, that's hell. And when we live from the voice of spirit, that's heaven. And to live from ego is hell because ego basically is made up of the voice of fear and the voice of judgments and the voice of conflict and all that goes along with that, which God is not. And so that takes us away from peace and joy and love and oneness. And everyone makes an ego. So this is not something we're telling you you're bad because you have an ego. All right? We're sharing this to be helpful so you understand the dynamic of what goes on inside and how to sort out where's that voice coming from. And that voice is coming from all my conditioning having to do with an external world. And this other voice that wants to take me to unconditional loving and peace and joy is telling me how to transcend that and be what I'm really created to be. And so everyone has an ego. They make an ego, a self for themselves. And this self that we construct is subject to a variety of painful and difficult experiences because of its instability. Our instability of mind is really the work of ego. And everyone also makes an ego for everyone else. Because we have an ego and we see from the ego and listen from the ego, we project onto others they have an ego. So if you're really pointing out the ego in everyone else, it's like, whoa, you're really on top of your own, you see, because you have to have one to see one, is what it's about. And so that's another dimension to talk about another time. But understand that the ego lives on comparisons. It thrives on comparisons and judgments. Equality is beyond its grasp because it wants to separate. Therefore, it's going to always see things and point out things that make you different and not okay and everything else. So you can't know your oneness, which is the truth, and takes you away from the way you're supposed to be living and experiencing life that is so fulfilling and enriching. And so the ego cannot survive. The ego cannot survive without judgment over others, over oneself, over life. It is not into acceptance. That is what the spirit is about. So we know that egos can clash, right? Right? Oh yeah, you've never had an ego clash with an ego? You know, it can clash in any situations. And basically all relationships, you know, to say it in its simplest form, all relationship problems are ego related. The ego is involved. Spirit cannot clash. One or two people is totally unconditional loving, totally accepting. And I know that's you're going to think, your mind will go to, well, here's an exception. But spirits cannot clash, egos clash. Ego is a way of perceiving, and it's a way of perceiving your life, yourself, your world, always from fear and judgment. So you have instability, you have internal conflict going on. It has you living in and from the perception of illusion. What's an illusion? Illusion is something that we hold to be real, but it is not. Okay, an illusion is a lie. It's not the truth. It is only a perception, but we hold it to be real. Hello, I'm Reverend Howard Caesar, Senior Minister of Unity of Houston. Sorry for the interruption, but I just wanted a minute aside with you. Thank you first for tuning in to our program, and my hope is that you've been able to join us on a somewhat regular basis. Through this program, it is our desire to touch people's lives in a very positive way, support and enhance one's spiritual growth, and deepen their relationship with God. We've been televising to the greater Houston community for a number of years, and it has not been our practice to ask for donations or financial support. But today is an exception. Up until now, our ministry has covered the expenses of staff, editing, and TV airtime. However, due to the dip in the economy, in order to continue our weekly broadcasts and remain on TV, your support has become necessary. And keep in mind that a financial gift staying on the air will be a gift not only to yourself, but also to untold numbers of others who tune in and benefit. Any amount of support will greatly be appreciated, along with your prayers. Due to circumstances, some are able to give a smaller amount, and that's fine. Others may be able to give hundreds of dollars. It's all appreciated. And because in the end, it takes many thousands of dollars to be on TV, anyone who is capable and led to give $10,000 or more dollars, I'll be happy to meet with personally if so desired. Again, thanking you for tuning in, thanking you for any help that you can be. Peace and blessings to you from Unity of Houston. We have in our backyard at home, we have several bird feeders, and that draws a lot of birds around. And some of them have met with pain and death through their illusions. And at certain times of the day, the back windows of our home are somehow create a very convincing illusion to the birds. And the reflection in the window is something that they fly into. And some of them take the blow and fall down and get up and fly away. And others, unfortunately, hit the window and die. We've had birds, I've seen a hawk hit the window. Fortunately, it didn't break. The sad thing is we've had birds die at the foot of our windows. And this week, and the reason this comes to me to share is this week we had three birds, 2 doves and a mockingbird. They're crashing into illusions, okay? Reflections of where they have just been. They're looking and seeing where they've been. And they think they can go into where they've been. Illusions from behind them. And that takes them out. And the question is, how many of us are crashing into our illusions? You know? How many of us are hurt or dying in the illusions we built into our minds? How many of us are crashing into the reflections that we have of our past, where we've been, you know, where we've come from, and the things that are not necessarily true that we hold? You know, Jesus said, according to your beliefs, so it be done unto you. He didn't say, according to the outer world, so be it done unto you. He understood that the mind can create beliefs, which, you know, many are illusions. But according to those beliefs in illusions, even though they're illusions, so it be done unto you. And so we have to distinguish, you know, between what is an illusion, what's the truth, what isn't. And so an example of an illusion would be lack. You know, people experience lack, people experience prosperity, variations of that. You know, we may have a belief in lack. We may be conscious of it, we may have it unconsciously. It may be simply built into the fabric of our consciousness as a fear of lack. We don't want to have it. And so because we don't want it so bad to have an experience not enough, that's what we get, because that's the focus. But because we believe that there is not enough. And that's the work of the ego. It perceives illusions. When the truth is, there is no lack. The truth is, there is no lack in God. In all the universe, there isn't. And so, nevertheless, people crash into the illusions of lack because that's where the focus is. And because thoughts held in mind are going to produce after their kind, because life has to give you feedback as to where your consciousness is, so you can move your consciousness and get new feedback. That's the dimension. The most common tendency is for people to try to change things first at the level of effects working outside themselves, trying to change the outer conditions and circumstances, the people, different things, etc., out there, without changing the consciousness, you see, that underlie the effects that they're facing. Wherever we go, we take ourselves with us, right? Okay, so wherever we go, we take our consciousness with us, whatever level of consciousness we're currently living from. We could wish that we were in someone else's body. We could wish that we had someone else's life and circumstances and conditions. It looks wonderful. And if we somehow could go there and experience that, it would only be probably short-lived. Because in time, your consciousness would reorientate and reconstruct life back to fitting exactly what your consciousness is made up of. Because that's the law of mind. It has to give you the feedback that is accurate to what is dominant in you. Okay? There's a poem that is called Fancy Dive. Fancy Dive. It's written by Shel Silverstein. And it's about an incredible dive that this person took. And it has an interesting ending. I'll share it. It goes like this. I don't know how anyone could do all this in the air, but this is the way it goes. The fanciest dive that ever was done by Melissa of Coconut Grove. She bounced on the board and flew in the air with a twist of her hair and a twirl, or with a twist of her head and a twirl of her hair. She did 34 jackknives, backflipped and spun, quadrupled gainered and reached for the sun, and then somersaulted 9 times and a quarter, and looked down and saw that the pool had no water. The point is that people want to do impressive things. People want to be amazing, have powerful experiences. But first things first, seek ye first the kingdom, and then you will be amazing. We can't forget to check out what's going on in our consciousness. Inside first, you see. We all have mental models of ourselves which can sometimes be limiting, and we have some deeply seated, sometimes unconscious ideas or concepts that are limiting us, and they may have come from core ideas and core stories that were passed on to us, maybe in childhood. It might have been attitudes that we passed on, and we bought into certain attitudes from our parents and some of their views, or it might have been people we hung out with, or people we gave a sense of authority to, whatever. In her book, The Real Question, Debbie Ford, she refers to core ideas that we carry as underlying commitments. And she writes this, she says, our underlying commitments drive our thoughts, our beliefs, and most important, our choices. They are unseen forces that shape our realities. Our underlying commitments are responsible for the discrepancy between what we say we want and what we're actually experiencing. These underlying commitments are formed by unconscious decisions we've made in the past, the illusions that we're slamming into, you see. And so in essence, she wants us to understand that we may think that we're ready for new great things and blessings, but in our unconscious depths, we may have some deeper commitments that are blocking us that we have to really get in touch with. And often it is some of our stories that we tell over and over to ourselves and to others about our life, about ourselves, that limits us and can hold us back. My dear friend and prayer partner, Roger Teal, minister in Denver, he refers to these limiting stories that we may live from that block our good. He refers to them as the old, the cold, and the told. The old, the cold, and the told. So let me tell you, the old, he refers to, are the stories that we usually formed in response to early setbacks and painful experiences, maybe in childhood, deeply rooted in our past. We may have told these stories over and over for a long time, and it became our truth. But we realize that our stories are just stories. They're really just that, and basically there are composed responses to events and experiences that we've had, and they can often be inaccurate. They're not the final truth. And so there's great value in noticing what our stories are. Even when I went to India one of the first several times, it's about clearing your consciousness. And one of the things they very much emphasized at the Oneness University was looking at your stories, hearing your stories in your mind, or even that you may be articulating. We all have stories, and it's becoming awake and aware to what they are. So there's great value there. We say, something I'll never get over is, or we say, if only I had, or what always seems to happen to me is, or, there's stories, and there's clues as to the consistency there. And they become our myths, our personal myths that we allow them to run our lives. So that's the old. The cold, these are the stories about ourselves, Roger says, and our future possibilities that have no heart. And they can be the most harsh rememberings, interpretations of some event or time in our life that we cling to. And the story we have in our mind is very diminishing, very belittling, holds us back, and kind of slams our worthiness or whatever. And so sometimes you need to realize that there's the possibility of getting help, going to see someone and sharing our story, getting a new interpretation, that maybe there was something gained there, maybe there was a gift, maybe something learned and a blessing. So that's the cold. And then there's the told. These are the stories that have been told about us, ones that others have told about us, or that we may have bought into. I had an instructor back at ministerial school many years ago, and he shared how he was kind of labeled as a child, and his mother would share the label in front of friends and so forth and talk about the boy like he wasn't there. And he shared how rooted he was in pain as a result of that, and how long and how many years it took him to get beyond the story about himself carrying that label that he bought into, the story that was being told by someone else, but he bought, that was very damaging and unhealthy. There are limiting stories that we are told about life, about the economy, about race, about lifestyle, about God, and we may buy into it at any age. There's author Donna Markova that talks about this as a sort of graffiti of the soul. Interesting, graffiti of the soul. And it's the idea that oftentimes the inner walls of our mind and soul are graffitied with sort of like advertisements, commercials, opinions that everyone has extended to us, labels, all these kinds of things. And that turning inward spiritually really requires some major cleanup. And she goes on to say, when you have the courage to shape your life from the essence of who you are, you ignite becoming truly alive. And this requires letting go of everything that is inauthentic. So perhaps it's time to clean the graffiti, the inner graffiti that we have been carrying around. I'm sure we all have some. It requires some inner scrubbing, which equates to some powerful letting go, some powerful releasing, some powerful rethinking and reconstructing of who and what we are. And so when we let go and we release of the old and the cold and the told, when we do, life gives us the opportunity to create a new and more powerful life-giving story that my friend Roger calls the gold. The gold story, okay? You can create a golden story, and it's to clear about how you have seen or felt about yourself and life. In the Course in Miracles, which some of you study and I value, Jesus is speaking in first person and says this: if you are willing to renounce the role of guardian of your thought system and open to me, I will correct it very gently and lead you back to God. Isn't that powerful? You know? And what it's talking about is that we're all in relationship with, just as our friend James Van Praagh said, beings beyond the veil. Jesus is there for you every day. The Christ is within you that we teach. It's a higher dimension within you, your higher self, the voice of Spirit, the voice of the Holy Spirit, God, whichever label you place on it, there's gold there. That's where the gold is, you know, and it's beyond ego, beyond the voice of ego, and it's there to gently help you by scrubbing the walls. And that's why Jesus says, if you are willing to renounce the role of guardian of your thought system, which is what the ego does, and open to me, I will correct it very gently and lead you back to God. Many stand guard over their ideas and beliefs because they want to protect their thought system as they are. That's the work of ego, because change is always fearful to those who live in ego, dominated by a separate self. The ego is trying to keep a separate self alive. Don't change me. You know, I have basis for being in as much pain and my life not working as this, you see. So ego will argue for staying there. But the ego would have you believe that if you allow no change to enter into your life, that you will then find peace. That actually the thing to guard against is change, so that you can be, just leave me alone so I can have peace. You will never have peace that way. We're here to grow. We're here to change. That's what it's about, you see. Because the ego will keep you where you are in instability, the instability of your existing fears and inner conflict. Because it's in disagreement with God's idea of who you are. And you have to change and move over to a closer, truer, more accurate sense of how you are held to be in the heart and mind of God. So, a mind in separation from God has to be confused. It must be confused because it's uncertain about what it is. And so there's tremendous peace and relief that comes to a person who is willing to meet themselves, their true selves, and their brothers and sisters, humanity, totally without judgment. That's hard. Totally without judgment. That's why Jesus said, judge not. Judge not. If you want to move on and move beyond, because you get stuck in your judgments. What you call anyone out there is exactly coming back at you. What you attacks you. You see? The Course in Miracles states, only those who give over all desire to reject can know that their own rejection is impossible. Okay? And God's creations are given their true authorship, but you prefer to be anonymous when you choose to separate yourself from your author. And so, it's saying that we're here today because we want to know and understand God authored you. God authored you, and that you are the gold of God. You really are. But we're not awake to that truth. It takes a while to get there. You know, you're not the old, you're not the cold, you're not the told, you are the gold. All right? All right. So be rooted now in the voice of Spirit. Trust the voice of Spirit that wants to come through. Be willing. Ask God to be able to distinguish stories that are of ego, because you feel the fear, you feel the conflict, you feel the sense of separation, you hear the judgments in your mind, and you know, therefore, that's ego. And ask God to strengthen and move you and shift you to a whole new way of being that is aligned with your true nature. Stop telling limiting stories, and when you become aware of an old, a cold, or a told story, just sit down, get a piece of paper, and journal in a story of gold, because that's who you are. Just a little willingness is all that is asked of the Spirit. Go for the gold. God bless you all.
Thank you for joining us for today's message. We invite you to be with us again next Sunday. Unity is inclusive, welcoming people of all walks of life in dignity and love. We believe that love, strength, and goodness dwells within you. May we all live in unity with God, humanity, and all of God's creation. And remember, as Rev Caesar says, life is meant to be good.